Thank you, everyone, for being here. I don't think this panel needs any more of an introduction, and I'm sorry to say to everyone else who's presenting later, but this is going to be the best panel of the day. So we're here with 4 climate titans who have shown us that climate ambition can cross party lines, can turn into climate action, and that we can demonstrate benefits to our state, to our communities, and around the globe. So I'm going to ask, we're going to take it back from a bit of the modeling and look historically and say, how did we get where we are? What were the successes that we had? And how do we then think about lessons learned in moving forward as we see an ever-increasing hostile framework for climate action in the state and across the globe? So I want to start with Fran Pavley, who might be patient zero in this in the best way possible. But you authored AB 32. You authored AB 1493, the Pavley Clean Car Standards. Did you think when, in the heyday of that, in sort of a bureaucratic exercise, that we would get to here? What are the lessons learned, and how did you end up from the point where we were to today, where California has a very outsized presence, a very ambitious climate program, and is sort of going up against heavy hitters at the federal level?
It's a pleasure for me to be here, and it's a pleasure to be the Environmental Policy Director at the Schwarzenegger Institute right here at USC. And I appreciated hearing from the economists in the room, Antonio Bento. And I keep thinking this delegation, we would have had a lot of fun if we just had this whole one-day session at the auto show, so some of them could come through, or we could make some comments that might be of interest to them. Anyway, how did this bill become a law? Just looking back on it, just a little bit of history. I'm a native Angelino and old enough, having grown up in the San Fernando Valley, to remember the 1950s and early 60s, where you were not allowed to go out for recess. This is still a scarring memory for myself because the air was so bad because of smog. We knew it had something to do with cars. And then eventually President Reagan got into office, and because of the anger of the suburban housewives protecting the health of their children and the desire for the state to do something about it, eventually the Air Resources Board was created. So air pollution has always been the tie-in to anything with climate change, actually, the beginning of it. And Mary Nichols is very good at giving you all the historical and legal history behind all this. So I was a brand new freshman. I didn't know you don't come into office in your first bill that you were going to introduce in January of 2001 would anger all the automobile manufacturers and oil companies. But as a former middle school teacher, I was up to having that kind of discussion with boisterous opposition. So that bill was introduced. After the first committee, I realized this was going to be a challenge, and so I got it through my first transportation committee, where people didn't really take it seriously, because who could get that through? The timing was good, though. 2 things had happened. The Bush administration pulled out of going forward with the Kyoto protocols. There was actually articles, full-page cover of Time magazine about climate change. The Union of Concerned Scientists had just completed a report in looking at climate change and the impacts to California. And it's interesting, in 2000, they were looking at, snowpack, sea level rise, the link between climate change and health and warmer temperatures. And so it became a more relevant issue to California. And plus, everyone knows with all our cars, they call it air pollution. And even though we didn't usually use the term greenhouse gas emissions, climate pollution from the tailpipe of automobiles was also a concern and a growing part of the problem. And because under the Federal Clean Air Act, passed 50 years ago next year, we can pass, as you know, in California, more stringent tailpipe emission standards than the federal government. I was very clear in my comments and learned not to talk about fuel efficiency standards, because we can't regulate those, but we can certainly regulate the tailpipe emissions. Fast forward, this bill became a law, but not without a lot of incredible work. Just a shout out to Gray Davis, who signed the bill, and John Burton, who was head of the Senate at the time, gave everyone in his caucus two choices. You either support the bill or you're neutral on the bill, but it is moving through. They understood the policy and the politics of this, even in Sacramento at that time. No discussion in any hearing on whether there was climate change or not. Yes, Antonio, there was discussion of whether you would now be driving unsafe cars and those kinds of things, the same exact arguments every time. So this bill went through the system, not without increasing a broader coalition, and this is sort of the politics of how you pass a bill like this. You had healthcare advocates, the nurses, the California Medical Association, the American Lung Association supporting this measure. The interfaith community were amazing advocates for this and creating messengers. In fact, the 41st vote on this bill was from someone where a priest the week before visited him in his home to talk about the moral responsibility of taking care of the planet. So that's just some background stories if you're interested in it. But the climate change bill is important because mobile sources are number one source of pollution. And so when Governor Schwarzenegger came into office, he promised to legally defend the tailpipe emission bill because he understood the importance of climate change, and it became part of his executive order under AB 32, which I had introduced to put it in statute. Legislators like putting things into statute, into law, so they're enforceable and hopefully will, since it'll have to be adopted over decades of time, we want the legislature's buy-in on this, and when governors change, they will all be on board regardless of party. Governor Schwarzenegger was on board from the beginning, helping defend the tailpipe bill. We went to Washington, D.C. and spoke about that. And then on AB 32, the tailpipe bill was the biggest part of the emission reduction strategy, along with renewable portfolio standard. The first time that was passed was in 2002. And energy efficiency and it's a relatively small part, about 20% on cap and trade. So that's sort of the beginning of the discussion. We always had some bipartisan support, not as much as possible because of the opposition, but at the end of the day, people were supporting of this measure, and poll after poll by the Independent Public Policy Institute of California, they do an annual poll every July, showed that not just Democrats, but independents in growing numbers, demographic groups all over the state, and Republicans were supporting these measures. Why? Number one, protecting the public health and other reasons as well. So thank you for allowing me to just sort of share with you a little bit of the background.
No, that's perfect, and it's a nice segue. Governor Schwarzenegger, as the governor and as a Republican, you faced a lot of pressure to veto AB 32. Yet you stood up to all the traditional business adversaries and supporters of Republican markets, and you said, no, economic and climate policy can be good economic policy. How did you do that? And it turns out you were right, which is great. But how did you do that? And do you see next steps going forward and how that argument can be used to maybe right the ship?
Well, it was not easy, but what is? Anytime you want to accomplish something really big, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, a lot of courage. And it's also something that you never do by yourself. You have a lot of help. And I think that Fran was just talking about this. I mean, she was the warrior and she was the creative mind, and she created one kind of environmental bill after the next, and she was absolutely like a workhorse up there in Sacramento. And so I have to say that I give, my credit of what my contribution then was to Terry Tamminen. Because when I ran for governor in 2003, I wanted to take this job seriously and also protect the environment. Even though I was a Republican, I didn't see it as a party issue. I thought it was a people's issue, because I felt very strongly that there's no Democratic air or Republican air, that we all breathe the same air, and there's no Democratic water or Republican water. We all drink the same water, so therefore we all have to be responsible in protecting that. And but Terry Tammen was the one that really educated me. I didn't know much about the environment and about the threats and the dangers and about global climate change and about the pollution and vehicle emissions and all those details I did not know. My heart was there to improve the situation, but I did not have the knowledge then. But Terry Tammen brought me up to speed very quickly. And then when I went to Sacramento, I got together with the Democrats and separately with the Republicans and told them this is where I see my vision when it comes to the environment and where California ought to be and why California is an important place, not only that we have to kind of be number one in the United States, but whatever California does, it's such an important state. It's the number one state in the union that the whole world looks at us, so we become an example. So there's two powers. One of them is that we can really do a great job for California, but then also to be great leaders for the rest of the world. And so I kind of mapped that out, and I kept repeating those kind of things in my speeches, environmental speeches, that I want to reduce greenhouse gases, that we want to reduce tailpipe emissions, we want to go and green our buildings, and we want to get a low-carbon fuel standard, and we want to get more renewables. I thought it was totally ridiculous that we were tinkering around 20% with our renewable energy being in California. I mean, why not go to 50% as quickly as possible? And so, you know, we shot for high goals. And so the trick of it was, I knew that the Democrats would be on board. You know, they were more to the left than I was. So they were fighting for a carbon tax and all kinds of other things. So it took negotiations and careful walking through all of that. And but my real responsibility was, as a Republican, to make the business community feel at ease. So because I was a Republican, it was easier for me to make them feel at ease as much as possible, not 100%. Because they always hated those kind of things, those kind of changes. But I was able to go. Chevron was the big, 800-pound gorilla in California. And so whatever they did, kind of everyone else fell into place. And so I went to Chevron. And even when I ran for governor, I went to Chevron and I met with them and told them what my philosophy is about fossil fuels and all this stuff. And so they kind of had an interest in working with me, so that I worked with them. So when I went to them and said to them, I said, look, we are right now negotiating this AB 32. I want you to not be the happiest camper in town over this. Clearly you will not be. I said, but I want you, if you hate it or don't like it so much, stay out of it. Don't fight us. Don't fight against it. Don't come and start lobbying against it, because it's not going to help. And then, there are a lot of things that we need to do together. So they started working with me, and Chevron stayed out of it. And then others started staying out of it. And so the Republicans and the business community started more and more getting comfortable with it. And, they saw me fighting the Democrats about certain issues, and they were happy about that, and we really made that a big deal, how we were kind of fighting back and forth, and they're not going to do this to our business community and all this kind of stuff. But, so we kind of got it closer and closer where we could really sign a deal. So this is how this whole thing came about. But the important thing also was to have the general public kind of buy in to the whole thing. And so for us, it was extremely important that we always used a kind of the health aspect as one of the strong kind of messages, not just about rising sea levels and about polar bears and about the icebergs melting and those kind of things. We felt that we needed to use something that really affects everybody. And so the health aspect and letting the people know in America, or in California specifically, that we got to go and reduce, greenhouse gases. We got to go and reduce the particulate matter that's out there. We got to reduce pollution. And the only way we're going to do that is by making our vehicles go electric and hydrogen, and create more renewable energy and get off fossil fuels slowly. And I just want to mention one other thing, and that was where, by me talking to Chevron, had such an impact on them, on their trust, that even though they didn't like when they were sitting there with me at the bill signing for AB 32, because we put them right next to the environmentalists, so this was, it was very funny, the whole thing. We all had a good time, right? They didn't, but in any case, it was very fun. So, but I mean, the thing was that when I went to them and I said, I want to build a hydrogen highway, because there's always this debate about should we have the fueling stations first and then the cars will come, or should we have people buy the cars and then the fueling stations will come? That's the usual argument. And I think what was really helpful was that they said, yeah, we want to be your partners. And they made immediately available endless amount of gas stations, their own gas stations, to go and to switch out the tanks underneath and to put hydrogen fuel there. So that was really extraordinary that we started celebrating and opening up one fueling station after the next, one gas station after the next. And we then had kind of like, what is it now, 28? I've forgotten what it is now, 28 or so fueling stations in California that you can literally go anywhere now with a hydrogen-fueled, hydrogen-powered car. So this is kind of, again, they paid for it. They let us do that. They helped us in every way possible. So it's really very, very important that we don't villainize people or companies, that we kind of include them and kind of inspire them to go and start investing in green energy and start working with us on this whole thing rather than villainizing, because we get more done that way.
No, I think that's great. And I think making the business case is really important. But Senator de León, you have really broadened the appeal of climate policy to our most disadvantaged communities, speaking to the impacts and making sure that our most underserved communities do see the benefits of climate action. We see this now in proposals like the Green New Deal. What has the process been like? Do you think there needs to be more effort addressing sort of these frontline communities? And how do we show the benefit of climate action, not just on the economic front, but to our communities?
Let me reframe your question a little bit and sort of kind of go back a little bit to what Fran was saying, because I think a major piece of legislation, obviously, clearly with the Kyoto protocols and with then President George W. Bush not recognizing the Kyoto protocols, the importance of a state like California. And I think under the leadership of Fran and Arnold was incredible. And one of the unsung heroes, too, is obviously then Speaker Fabian Nunez, who handled the political leadership to get it across the goal line. Had that not happened, we would not be speaking about AB 32, nor the 40%, nor the 80% reduction goals that we have currently today. So I think that with AB 32 and the establishing the Global Warming Solutions Act was very important. Fran said something that was really critical that I think I want to reemphasize. So I want to go back to 2002, where we actually started then Senator, not one of my colleagues, but I think you served together, Byron Scher, then State Senator Byron Scher, who established the first RPS, Stanford law professor, who established the first RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, back in 2002. The goal was 20%. Eventually, with Senator Joe Simitian, it became 33%. The reason why this is important is by any objective measure, in terms of millions of metric tons of greenhouse gas, CO2 equivalent reduced in the state of California, empirically speaking, the reduction of GHG, carbon dioxide equivalent, has come by way of the RPS as well as energy efficiency by reducing your energy load. That is significant in terms of policy that comes to fruition. So I think political leadership and regulatory leadership under the tutelage of Mary Nichols is really, really critical. We can talk about a whole suite of regulations and policies and tools that move towards that goal, but establishing that goal is absolutely critical in terms of 100% clean energy. So we got from 20%, 33%, now 50%, and 100%, which is statutory in law, not a regulation. I am biased, and I think that Fran would agree with me because I'm not of the executive branch, but I am more biased to laws as opposed to executive orders, because we know that, presidents come and go, governors come and go. You don't know if they'll execute or adhere to the leadership that Arnold, had really established as a Republican, which I think was marvelous. And given Arnold's status, if you will, aside from being a governor, that carried that extra cachet nationally and internationally, which was so critical for folks to come on board. Folks you can have an academic symposium, and academics will come. But if Arnold calls it, academics and other folks will come that will be in the position to make the actual leadership decisions that actually politically move the ball. So that's why political leadership and regulatory leadership is absolutely critical. But let me say this, by establishing 100% clean energy in that goal, for the first time in our nation's history, what we have done is we've allowed our utilities, our investor-owned utilities on the private side, as well as our publicly owned utilities, to compete for the same market space as the fossil fuel industry. Meaning that, as Arnold mentioned, we have Chevron, we have 76 gas stations, Valero, Tesoro, Arco, Mobil. We have gas stations that are ubiquitous. That's why the vast majority of Californians and Americans drive internal combustion cars, because the transportation fuel supply or accessing it is not difficult at all whatsoever. To access electrons, and hopefully eventually and soon clean electrons, is much more difficult. And those are the obstacles and barriers. But by allowing our investor-owned utilities through the PUC, CEC, and CARB, as well as our municipally owned utilities, and we'll have challenges with grid modernization, no doubt about that. But we will actually change, California's economy quite dramatically by dealing with the tailpipe emissions as you decarbonize the grid. To put this in context, prior to 2002, Emily, the electric industry emitted 108.4 millions of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. As a result, to date, it is roughly about 64. We've almost cut it, almost, not entirely, in half. And that represents one of the largest, if not the largest, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, empirically speaking, in the state of California. And that's why policy matters, and that's why when you allow the utilities to compete in the same market space with the fossil fuel industry by hopefully, over a course of time, creating charging stations. And Arnold made reference to hydrogen. We shouldn't pick winners and losers. It's my hope that hydrogen is going to play a huge role as well, too. I know Mary drives Toyota Mirai right now, which is an excellent car, which I drove, one time in Tokyo. It's a great car. It's an amazing car. We make this ubiquitous, and part of that infrastructure, transportation electrification, that allows, folks to have different choices. Now, to your question with regards to people of color, which disadvantaged communities is the euphemism for black and brown communities up and down the state of California, it is absolutely critical that they are part of the equation. And the reason why I say this is that in communities, frontline communities up and down the state of California, throughout the country, they bear the brunt, if you will, of the greenhouse gas impacts, as well as the other criteria pollutants that they breathe into the lungs every single day. So if you live in Midwest America, Paducah, Kentucky, Bloomington, Indiana, and you go to Target, you go to Walmart, and you buy a flat screen television set, you buy silverware, wherever you may buy, and it comes from the Pacific Rim, most likely, it came through the ports of LA and Long Beach. So the young girl's lungs who lives in Southgate and Huntington Park and East LA and Bow Heights, they were blackened and they were seared from all that toxic emissions, so they can go to distribution points throughout the country and deliver that widget, whatever is going to be sold and purchased by the American consumer. So making sure that, and Mary and I work together on this with regards to the auction revenues and making sure a baseline percentage, a minimum of 25%, are invested in these communities that are disproportionately impacted by CO2 as well as criteria pollutants. So you can have investments and rebates to purchase these types of vehicles, access to this type of technology, low-income solar, rooftop distributed generation, weatherization, energy efficiency, planting of trees to sequester GHG. So these are really critical components. And by the way, empirically speaking, not just anecdotally, actually scientifically, quantitative research. When it comes to the various communities, and you look at the cross tabulations, whites, white females, white males, different age groups, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans. The one group that is always the number one in terms of not just in support of, but the intensity of support. In fact, willing to pay a tax or do a self-assessment on a tax, especially when they're at the lowest economic strata, which is very telling, are communities of color, and specifically Latinos, come out on top. So in many ways, they are the number one environmentalists. They have not just been viewed or perceived or framed within that mind or that lens of the Sierra Club or the NRDC or the California League of Conservation Voters or what have you, et cetera. They're not viewed or framed that way. And I think it's very, very important that we reframe, refocus, and be accurate with regards to how these communities, as you say, the frontline communities, have borne the brunt of the CO2 atmospheric emissions and the consequences as a result, but all that smog. And I remember we had dinner, and remember, Arnold, you said this too, and Arnold was absolutely right, and Fran alluded to this too. We talk about, amongst ourselves, obviously, GHG, greenhouse gases, CO2, what have you. Nobody knows what that is, and they could care less, okay? They talk about toxic pollution and that poison that they breathe into their lungs every single day. So I'm trying to be disciplined myself and reframe myself when I engage with folks, because when you talk about pollution, that's when, you know, the light bulb pops in, and not GHG. So that's really critical that we emphasize that.
I think that's great. Now, last but not least, Mary Nichols, who has had a busy morning already, but you regulate both greenhouse gases and air pollution in California. You are, and since 2007, you've been in charge of putting together the state's plan and seeing that it gets implemented, the getting shit done part. That is really hard. Once you have climate ambition, it's really actually hard to move the ball forward. So given where you started, which could have been a very bureaucratic exercise and, you know, dialing knobs in a regulatory way. How did it go from 2007 and AB 32 to the movement that we see today, where we see a reframe, we see motivation, we see not only we're talking about frontline impacts, but we're talking about frontline action, and we're talking about moving the ball forward. We're looking at a California versus I think it's Goliath versus Goliath. And so how did we get from 2007 to here? And I guess, where do we go next?
Well, that opens up a lot. I've been thinking lately about writing a book, and I was thinking about titling it "All the Things I Got Wrong," but then I realized it would probably be too long if I actually listed all the things I was wrong about. Beginning with Fran's AB 1492. The greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles bill. I was working in the Davis administration at that time. I was at the Resources Agency, now rechristened the Natural Resources Agency, because people used to think if it was resources, it meant you had money to give out, which of course we didn't. But at the time, I remember thinking, wow, ARB is not going to be able to do this. It's going to be too hard. They're going to be fighting with the auto companies about fuel efficiency, and it's going to be in litigation immediately for years, and it's just kind of like an empty exercise. Well, of course, it was in litigation for years, but we won. We won, ultimately, and we won even more so because Barack got elected president, Barack Obama, and he decided that not only was he going to give California the waiver that we needed to enforce the Pavley law, but also he was going to get EPA to adopt some standards at the federal level, and then eventually that brought the auto industry to the table to talk about how we could align these programs and have one national program, and we did, and it was a huge success until just recently when we've had a little backsliding going on. But so that's one of many things that I think when you're in the middle of it, you don't always realize quite where it's all going. But AB 32, which Kevin alluded to, and Arnold also when he talked about how he was able to actually get it over the finish line, is grounded on those vehicle standards. The language of the bill is very clear that the biggest chunk of emissions is supposed to come from those vehicle emission standards. So that was already baked into the program, and all we had to do, CARB, was to actually implement them, make them happen, which is mostly an engineering task. But Emily is right that, of course, it's the part of it that involves getting the public on board that is critical to making this all work. And, we're talking about a program that's now been, in effect, in law for almost a decade and a half. A long time. It takes a long time to make anything happen. And without the celebrity of Arnold Schwarzenegger signing it and getting his picture on the cover of, was it Time or Newsweek? One of those. All of them. Everybody. Holding up the globe, holding up, it was the holding up the globe. Sorry. Okay. But it wasn't fake. It was a real picture. Anyway, it was real. And without the sense that it was coming out of Silicon Valley, which played a key role in having the investors who were interested in making money by bringing forward technology that could meet these new standards. All of those pieces were really critically necessary to make it happen. So the job of the Resources Board, which I've had the amazing opportunity to help steer for these years, has been to try to bring all these strings together and keep everybody working together, sort of moving forward. And there have been many times when one or another piece of it threatened to fall off the table, including the cap and trade program, which we haven't mentioned up until now. But one of the big issues of concern, and one of the things that Arnold negotiated for, and before he signed AB 32, was language about having a market-based program as part of the scoping plan for AB 32. So I knew coming into the job that my job was to deliver a market-based program. That was definitely part of what we talked about when I was interviewing with him in that tent out in the courtyard while he was smoking a cigar. But that's another story. That's a story for another day. But a different thing. Yeah. But the idea that you could blend together the very strong desire of the Democrats in the legislature for a real tough program of regulation and their desire in some cases for a tax, but because they really wanted the revenue to be able to do something with the market-based program that the governor wanted. That was the toughest thing about pulling together the first scoping plan, without a doubt, was to be able to put these two things together and to basically have them both. So a lot of my work for the first years there was trying to show everybody how these different kinds of approaches not only could work together, but actually had to work together, that we would never have gotten as far as we have in terms of actual reductions in the kinds of pollution that cause global warming if we hadn't been able to tie it to air pollution reductions, if we hadn't been able to tie it to energy efficiency and the opportunities for new kinds of energy solutions, new kinds of building materials and all of that, and at the same time put a cap over the top of it and allow for some form of trading of allowances back and forth to help to keep the business community more or less on board and keep international groups that were following what we were doing interested in being a part of it. So the partnership with Quebec that we have, which is also being attacked at the moment, where we recognize each other's allowances and hold joint auctions, and which the Trump administration is also trying to invalidate now, was critical to me and very threatening to many other people, because it was the first time that we were able to demonstrate that California as a state could operate in a global market environment and be bringing down emissions at the same time. So, all of these things have been evolving over the years, and they've all had different constituencies and different opponents, sometimes a shifting cast of characters. I remember when we first came out with the original cap and trade program, and we wanted to hold back a few of the allowances, 10% or so, to help make sure that we could moderate the price and also, be aware of what was happening. There were people in the legislature who came to me and said, please, please don't do this, because if you have revenue coming from this program, it will set up fighting among legislators over who's going to get the money. And people that I won't name names here, but who are, very good progressive people. Well, of course, the opposite turned out to be true. And I think the brilliance of what Kevin de León did in terms of making sure that we were targeting those revenues towards the disadvantaged communities has stood us in such good stead over the long haul in terms of being able to not just demonstrate that this isn't just a program for policy wonks, as you said, but also that it actually has something that now people are arguing about, which is the ability to actually make lives better. So this whole Green New Deal thing, in my opinion, which isn't, all that well defined, but it's based on the idea that government can intervene in a way that solves the big environmental problem, but do it in a way that also helps to reduce the terrible economic disparities that are, holding our economy back. So, we all did this. we all did this. That's it.
Well, and I think there's...
Excuse me, but I just want to add, because Mary would not really go there. It's not the kind of person she is, but I just want you to know she is the most important person right now to get all of this executed. I mean, we have all worked together, from Fran to Kevin, to Fabian, John Burton, all of those people, we all worked together on this. And it was very important to establish a vision and the laws. But you have to have a department that executes it. And you have to have a great leader of that department that executes it. And that's why I hired her, Mary Nichols. And people immediately, the Republicans, lashed out at me and says, another Democrat in the administration. I say, it has nothing to do with the party. I say, she is just the most experienced and the best. And I knew that the only way we can be successful with our vision is by having a great execution. And I was 100% right with that evaluation. Because when you look at today, the tremendous failure worldwide of what was agreed upon in 2015 at the Paris Agreement at CARB 20, what was it, 23 or 21 or whatever, one of the numbers exactly. But anyway, it was in 2015. Everyone agreed to a certain kind of a reduction. No one forced anybody to agree to anything specifically. They made it up. But my concern then was, and still is today, do they have an air resources board? Because if you don't have an air resources board, you would not go and make this vision of yours become a reality. Because politicians talk a big game a lot of times, not just here in America, but worldwide. So now when all those countries come together, 200 countries, and they say, well, we are going to lower our greenhouse gases by 15%. And another one says, well, I don't think we can manage 15%, but we can manage 8%. Another one says, well, I can go all out and go 28%. And this is how they went. And now we see that 70% of those countries did not comply with their own goal because they don't have an air resources board. You got to have someone then goes and says, okay, you've just promised 15%, now let's figure out how do we get there? And then work it out. How do you get there? And then have a department that really executes it. It's all about execution. Everyone can have a dream and a big wish and a goal, but I mean, how do you execute it? So this is with everything like that. And so this is why I just want to say, Mary, you have been an absolute saint with that work. And you know you have to really, there's so many battles to fight. And I just wanted to mention that because, you know, that she has continuously fought that, and she has fought it through, you know, the Brown administration, because there has to be consistency. And he was very good to continue on with our battle and with our vision. And now Governor Newsom is very good, and he will continue on with our vision. So that is the important thing. But the stability all rests right there at that department. I just want you to know that.
No pressure, Mary. Don't mess it up. But I think you've spoken to the tremendous progress that California has made. Transportation, though, it's still the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, and we've made strides. We're seeing more zero-emission vehicles on the road. We're seeing the hydrogen highway come to fruition, and that's the light-duty piece. And then there's this whole other, you know, piece of transportation that's non-light-duty vehicles that comes to ports. We think about ports and rail that both have climate impacts and air pollution impacts. How, and Mary, you said, so the biggest tranche of reductions that we were depending on came from the Pavley Clean Car Standards. What does California look like in a world in which we don't have those emission reductions? And then how do we even double down and go farther in transportation? How do we get to some of these other sectors? You recently had a cameo as a gas-guzzling used car salesman, but you've been a huge proponent of electrification. Is that the answer? Is it some mix of all of the fuels? How do we think about this going forward? And what is the role of the elephant in the room, which is sort of the California waiver and our ability to promulgate those standards?
Well, first of all, I think we should all watch, in case someone hasn't seen it, from Valas, the thing that we shot that is supposed to kind of inspire people to go electric. So let's have a quick look at that. Can you set it up? Because the pressure is on. Attention customers, I want you to listen very carefully. On behalf of Big Oil, I want to thank you all for choosing muscle cars that use gasoline. Long live the American muscles.
Recently, Arnold Schwarzenegger teamed up with Veloce to promote the benefits of electric cars. To show how they save time, money, and the environment, he went undercover as a used car salesman.
Hi, how are you? Howard Kleiner.
And tried to sell people gas cars instead.
Hello. Looking for a car? Hey. Howard Kleiner.
Oh, Howard
Good to see
Kleiner.
you, yeah. What are you looking for?
We're looking for like electric, fuel efficient, like quiet.
I have exactly what you're looking for.
What do you think, huh? How about this, huh?
Yeah, actually, I'm looking for some kind of electric hybrid mix.
Don't bullshit me.
Okay.
I'm just tired of spending money at the pump.
The pump?
Yeah.
Oh, this is great. You go to the gas station and you pump. Let me tell you something. The pump sometimes is more satisfying than sex.
I'd like to use something that can get me into the carpool lane, actually.
Oh, you mean a sticker? This is your lucky day. Anyone that buys a car today gets a free bumper sticker. I'll be back. Here, carpool lanes are for sissies. I support the oil company monopoly. You can choose any of those.
Can a battery-powered car do this? I think this will piss off my neighbors. You them right. It will impress your neighbors. This is testosterone. Yes.
My friend got an electric car and he got a tax credit.
You want a tax credit or do you want to have street credit? You know that the planet is too crowded right now, right? Gasoline cars create pollution and it curbs population. It brings it down. That is the idea.
That's not the way to go about that. So quiet in here. I love it.
But that's the problem, you see? Because it's so quiet that you hear literally everything that your family says. Think about that for a second.
You don't like the car, huh?
I do like the car.
I love the smell of exhaust. Smell this.
That's what we didn't want.
No.
You know what, actually, can I just get a supervisor in here?
Could I please talk to a supervisor?
Can we get a supervisor?
Can we speak to the manager?
All right, let me get the manager, all right?
Okay.
All right.
This is
I'm getting
crazy.
hungry and grouchy.
Yeah, me too.
Hello, I'm Harry, the sales manager. You ask for me?
It's the same guy.
How can I help you?
No.
Electric cars save money, time, and environment without sacrificing any of the fun and excitement of driving. And with over 40 available makes and models, you've never had more reasons to go electric. Go to electricforall.org and join us. Do it now. Come with me if you want a lift. If it burns gas, we got it.
To see more videos, learn about electric cars, and find the one that's right for you, visit electricforall.org.
We all had a good time doing it, right? Yeah. We all had a good time. But anyway, the bottom line is that what California has done with the tax incentive and we're giving people the chance to ride on kind of preferred lanes and all of those kind of things work very well. But now we have a federal government that is really fighting us in every step of the way, and they have now taken away the federal tax credits. The $7,500 will be gone by January, right? January 1st. So that means, and we see now already the sales going down. The first half of the year, the sales went through the roof. I mean, it's really unbelievable how many cars, over 100,000 cars were sold already this year. So that's really spectacular. And now with the tax credit evaporating, the sales will go down. And so California has to be very aggressive, I think, and use that cap and trade money and to subsidize that and really offer $7,500 or $10,000 tax credit for those cars, for those electric cars. And there's one thing that I've learned a long time ago, and that is we don't have to redesign the wheel here. We copy. If someone does really well anywhere in the world or in any other state, you copy. I mean, that's what I did. I looked through the bodybuilding magazines. I didn't invent the curl. I looked at it and said, how did this guy get this bicep? Oh, this is the curl he did with dumbbells and with barbells and so many reps, so many sets, and I copied it. And then I improved on that. But I didn't create it. And so it would be crazy for us to create a new way of inspiring people. All we have to do is just, that's why we created the digital handbook, a legislative handbook, because it makes people be able to copy our laws that we have created in California, but we can do the same thing back. Like if you look, for instance, at Sweden. I mean, in Sweden they have 25% or whatever is a tax for cars. So if you buy a car for $40,000, you pay now an extra $10,000 tax. But for an electric car, you don't. And for an electric car, you also ride cheaper on the roads. When you go to toll roads, you ride for half price. Parking, you get for free. You can use the bus lane. And all those kind of benefits you get when you buy an electric car. So now, the new car sales in Sweden, or in Norway. Norway was the latest one that I just read. The car sales lately was 60% of them were electric cars. 60%. So they really make changes, and it is very clear because always taxes made people change their behavior. If you give someone a tax incentive or if you tax somebody, it changes your behavior. And so now you can see that people are now really eager to get into electric car. People literally are saying in Norway, the latest interviews that they've done with people, they have literally people said, look, it would make no financial sense for me to buy a regular fossil fuel car. I will go electric. So people are really changing their minds, except if someone is a fanatic about a Mustang that he had to have a muscle car, he should buy it. He should have to ride.
I think there's a new one, yeah.
No, but exactly. Now it's a new Mustang that's electric. But someone should have the chance to buy the muscle car. but then he just has to pay the taxes, and that will be used again to give incentives to the other people if they want to buy an electric car. So that's the great thing about it. That's what we did here. That's what they're doing over there. And I think this is where the world is going to. So that's what we need to do in order to really lead and continue leading the world in the sales of electric cars. We need to offer those kind of incentives, I think. And we really got to promote it, and we got to, and it's amazing how well Tesla does. And I think slowly the other car companies are going to get the message. I mean, they're very slow. That's why I say slowly, because it's like unbelievable. They still, a lot of them are trying to cheat and to lie and to bullshit the people. I mean, it's like I went last year to the car show, and I saw this beautiful Mercedes, a van, kind of an SUV actually, and it looked really sexy, it looked beautiful, and I went up and it said then electric in front. And I said, now we're talking, finally Mercedes is getting there. And then when I asked the salesperson, I said, so tell me about this car. I said, I want to order one right away. Well, as you know, as you can see, this is a concept car. So I said, oh. I said, well, okay, fine, it's a concept car, but when is it coming out? When can I order one? And he said, well, you know how it is with concept cars. We never really know 100% if they come out, or if they come out in a different version, a different kind of, changes and stuff like that. You never know. So it was total bullshit to kind of create a news kind of like we are going electric. This is the new direction that we're going. But it was absolutely putting wool over people's eyes. So there was no intention there at all to have that vehicle. I've not seen that vehicle yet, and I don't think we will see it at the car show in LA when this week the car show starts. So there's some companies that are getting really serious and that are coming out with electric cars. Porsche just came out with one and they're showing it at the car show. And there's other companies that are coming out with some. So I'm going to be there on Friday and check it all out. But it's really slow, but we are really trying to put the pressure on the car companies to sign up with California. Of course, Trump is not helping in this whole thing. Now they're trying to hide behind Trump. We don't want to really offend the federal government and go and make a deal with California and all this kind of excuses you hear, right? I'm sure you've heard that, right? And so, but I'm on the phone with them, with a lot of them, and we push them and we get them, and I tell them, I said, look, I help you with the sales. If you come out with an electric car and you want me to endorse it and to sell it and to pump it up, I'm more than happy to do that, because that's
Howard
the direction.
Howard Kleiner will sell their cars.
That's the direction where we have to go. We have to go hydrogen. We have to go electric. That is the direction we have to go, because we cannot wait for any other country. I think it's a big mistake that the United States legislators make right now, that Congress, the whole Washington is saying, especially the Republicans, are saying, well, China is still polluting. They're creating more, coal-powered, plants. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. We should lead. America should lead with electric cars. It's inexcusable that in California we have now 550,000, 600,000 electric cars, and nationwide we have 1.6 million. So this is like, if you take California's out, then you have 1.2 million left there. So this is like, 3 times as much, really. Yeah. Right? So that is embarrassing. But we should have 6 million right now, because California represents 10% of the United States. So we should have 6 million electric cars out there if California has 600,000. That's the bottom line. And so, I think that California is now leading, and we are really very, very proud of that we all work together. And I'm very proud of the Republicans in California, because Jerry Brown would not have been able to extend AB 32 if Republicans, there were 7 or 8 Republicans that voted for it.
A couple of them.
Yeah, not a couple. It's more than that, but it was 7 or 8 of them in order to get it over the hump, which was really a big improvement from the time I was governor, where we only had 1 or 2 Republicans helping us with that cause. So I think I was very proud of them that they had the courage to step up to the plate and to do that. Anyway, so this is, I think, where we have to go.
Yeah. So you brought up the LA Auto Show. Mary, I have to ask. So CARB is making a statement. There's going to be no CARB attendance at the LA Auto Show. Could you speak a little bit to that and how that forwards?
So we always have had a big delegation of our staff to go, and it's it's kind of a perk, really, but it's also important opportunity to meet with the individual companies. But the tour was usually led by the global automakers group, and then the alliance would come along too. And since so many of them are joining in this litigation in Washington that's deliberately trying to get a court to say that California does not have a right to adopt emission standards for vehicles, we thought it was important to send the message to the companies that, we don't want to be part of this whiplash that's going on at the moment. They come out here and they want to greenwash their operations. And as Arnold said, some of the cars are not even cars that are available, but actually there will be unveilings of cars that people can order, beginning this year or next. And progress is being made, but it's not being made fast enough. Clearly, we've got to do more to accelerate the turnover. And we can't do it if California is pushed aside, because we are such a big share of the market, and we're an even bigger share when you add in the other states that follow our standards. So it was totally hypocritical, unjustifiable. I can't think of enough bad adjectives to say about their decision to join with the Trump administration in this litigation, which is trying to defend the rollback of the federal standards and then push California out of the room. Now, you hear these excuses about how pressure was brought to bear and they had to do something, but not only did the 4 companies who've signed up with California to work with us not join it, there are several other companies that just said, okay, we're just going to stay on the sidelines. We're not going to jump in there and be a part of this lawsuit. So I have to really call out, in particular, Toyota and General Motors, and I think the bad decisions that were made by their Washington representatives who just want to be able to, be in good graces with this White House. There's clearly nothing that could be done to them that would destroy their ability to function. And they will all say, and they have said, not just to me, but to the world at large, that their future is electric. That's where they're trying to go. They know that. It's not just us anymore, mandating things or even giving the incentives, although they need that to make the transition, because none of them have all of the financial wherewithal that they might like to have. But, they sign up to the standards in the first place because, let's face it, the federal government bailed them out. I mean, lest we forget, General Motors was bankrupt and the federal government stepped in. And as part of moving out of bankruptcy, General Motors got involved in creating the clean car standards that we're still living with at the moment. But the minute they got back on their feet, they're back to trying to deregulate again. So I don't know. I guess there's old adage about how once you're a particular thing, you're just going to stay that no matter what. But that's pretty much how it seems at the moment. So we have to fight them on that.
And I just want to add that Kevin was absolutely correct when he said executive orders are only good while you're in office. Mm-hmm. And the advantage of really getting things passed by the lawmakers in the House and in the Senate, mm-hmm. and then you signing the bill, that sticks. Mm-hmm. So, having an executive order, which was good during the Obama administration because it was very helpful, because they took our tailpipe emission standard and made it national, made it a federal standard, and that was really helpful for the whole nation. But now Trump goes in, then he throws out all those executive orders. And the next president will go in and they throw out Trump's executive orders. This is how it goes. And so this is why you have to go through the legislature and have to really pass laws. You're absolutely correct at that. That's where the power is.
Yeah, obviously with the signature of of the executive, in this case, the governor, or that being the president. And I think that's why political leadership matters at the end of the day, because all the statistical analysis and the empirical evidence that is brought forth, it's important that elected officials and political leaders and regulators have access to that information that you have put together in such an amazing manner, so we can work together in a collaborative fashion. We work together with each other. We don't want to be in a scenario where we're having symposiums and we're talking to each other, sharing the latest publication, what have you, et cetera. But if it's not being effectuated in real life, that's having an improvement on the human condition of everyday individuals, it has little impact at all whatsoever, other than perhaps the personal ambition of being published or passing a bill or introducing a bill, not passing a bill, right, but introducing a bill or signing an executive order of some sort. Obviously, Chrysler, Fiat, GM, and Toyota, remarkably, Toyota of all folks, with the Prius being designed, created in California for the California market especially, they made a very political decision to side with the Trump administration. It's very clear. And I think Mary said it very correctly that their folks who represent them in Washington, D.C. specifically, not Tokyo, but in Washington, D.C., said to headquarters in Tokyo, we believe the best thing is not to be on California's side, but on Trump's side. That's going to be a Pyrrhic, hollow victory for Toyota at the end of the day. I'm sure that some organization, some group is going to call for the boycott prospectively of Toyota, purchases, in the future. And if they do, good. Good for them. I say prospectively. Yeah, I know a lot of folks have the product right now as we speak, but we have to double, triple, quadruple down, if you will, on this incentive and we're going to have to find out if we get the most cost effective and you get the most bang for the buck. And I think that's why we'll rely on a lot of folks like you to figure out, to tell us, is it the most bang for the buck? But when they eliminate that federal tax, credit at the federal level, obviously, we need to make sure that trend line doesn't dip, because California is the leader with purchases of EVs, but we're not where we need to be with the EVs. So it's all relative speaking, right? So we really have to push this really, really hard. And especially, I would say, it has to be means tested. The early adopters have already adopted early. That's why they adopt early, because they have the financial wherewithal to purchase at whatever price point it is, because they have money. You have to really push this for middle class and working class folks, especially working class folks who are driving the most polluted vehicles because they don't have access to the most latest and greatest, most advanced, innovative green technology on zero carbon vehicles, whether it's hydrogen fuel cell, whether it's electric vehicles. So you really have to do this with intentionality and a sense of purpose, because the free market forces lent to their own devices will not correct these inequities. That's why, whether it is a substantial amount from cap and trade, or I would venture to say all of cap and trade, because if we're going to do watershed here, a little energy efficiency over there, if we're going to do a little low income solar over there, we're going to do some tree planting over there. If we're going to spread this like peanut butter across, the loaf, and we're not getting the most bang for the buck, because it's 40% are tailpipe, and that's the hardest, because when you're dealing with stationary sources through cap and trade, when you're dealing with the ag business, when you're dealing with energy efficiency, when you're dealing with decarbonizing the grid and dealing with IOUs, that is not a direct clash, if you will, with the fossil fuel industry. Once you go to tailpipe, that is a direct clash. That is World War III right there. And that's where it matters, because we've done the low-hanging fruit. This is the mega battle right there, and how we do this. And that's why what California does matters. What the world and the nation is watching what we do in California. And as a result, for example, not dealing with tailpipe, but on 100% clean energy on our grid, we have Jay Inslee in the state of Washington. We have Michelle Lujan in New Mexico. We have Como already in the state of New York. We have Maine and Connecticut and a few other states that have already statutorily moved towards decarbonizing their grid altogether. And that's why whatever Washington does or does not do, California will move forward and other states will follow us.
And I think that the very important issue, besides tax incentives and all those things, is communication. Because I know the day we're all meeting here, how do we go and become more successful with our electric cars and all of that. And there will be studies done and all this. But I can tell you, you can do all the studies in the world. If you don't communicate that the right way, and if you don't make this kind of like a 50-50 thing with 50% government through our laws and the other 50% because people want to join the crusade, the environmental crusade. And the environmental crusade, they want to join because they care. It matters to them. And what matters to them today is their health. And we have seen it when we fought in 2010, Proposition 23. The oil companies came in and they started spending millions of dollars at that time. And they had like 60% in the success of undoing all of our environmental laws that we have passed in 2006. By saying there's a recession now, jobs are being lost, let's wait until the recession is over and then make those environmental laws kick in again. Well, we knew exactly what that meant. They wanted to wipe out everything that we have done. And so we fought back. But the numbers didn't change much when we fought back. We started using just the rising sea levels and nothing changed much, a few percentage points. We talked about the ice is melting and temperatures are changing and all kinds of things that we do. As usually environmentalists talk, global climate change and all of those kind of things. But when we started talking about health, and when we started talking about what effect it has, what effect pollution has in the Central Valley on our children, and how they have asthma early on, and how people are dying because of pollution, that all of a sudden registered. And the numbers changed in no time. And we turned the numbers around, and we won with 61 or whatever percent it was, against the oil companies. Of course, we also raised millions of dollars, and we were very successful in raising that money, but they clearly outspent us. And it was kind of really great to see that we were able to fight successfully and communicate successfully. That people finally woke up and said, oh, that's what it is about. Because people just, and this is why I say, it's very tricky, because environmentalists keep over and over saying global climate change, and then they come up with things like zero net, carbon neutrality and all. And I said, go out on the street and ask anybody what that means. There's no one that can give you a definition about any of that. So how do you go and make people join your crusade if they don't quite understand what it means? You got to be much more simple about all of this stuff. And so to me, I just want to make sure, because there's a lot of very, very smart people here sitting and that are academic people, but I just want you to know, think about communication. Don't just keep repeating the things that impresses another environmentalist, but talk like something in a way that the ordinary folks out there on the street can identify with.
I was going to say it's a perfect segue to sort of the academic audience, and to say, it's not just the California muscle is, the legislature, the administration, the regulatory power, but we also depend quite heavily on the great work that is done at California universities and by researchers who are taking these climate impacts that might be really nebulous and trying to make them into statistics, into compelling arguments for the benefits of taking climate action. So I think that it's a very lovely sort of bridge towards sort of thinking about how we model climate policy, how we think about impacts, and how we can better not only look at the costs of, taking action, but the cost of inaction and looking at some of the other benefits.
Emily, just one line. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add to that, because Emily, as my former chief economist, I think I have a right to interject here.
You do.
I know you're trying to wrap this up, but it's really critical that we move beyond the, yes, we can have strong environmental rules and a good economy. We've heard that for years. You can't find a politician, even Republicans mostly now say that. So we have to get to the point where we're able to tease out how exactly good environmental and energy policies, strong policies, benefit the economy, because we keep pointing to the statistics, and I'm happy to keep helping to generate them, about the jobs in California, the investments in California, how our economy has prospered, but at the same time we were doing all these progressive things on climate. But I want to be able to show how that actually worked and how we could do better, because we got to do more. Clearly, we're not there yet, and we're going to have some new policies. So I just like to really underscore the point that you were making.
Yeah,
Sorry.
the point I want to make is I want to re-emphasize, because the brilliant academic work that you all do, let me tell you something right now, we cannot in no form, way, or shape do what we do without what you do. You arm us with all the empirical evidence. Without it, we have nothing at all whatsoever. So when we go testify, when we go before a committee, when we try to convince a governor or other colleagues, regulators, without the empirical evidence that you arm us with, we have nothing at all whatsoever. So it's a marriage that works together. It's absolutely critical. The second thing I just want to add real quick, it's about political power too, because I'm thoroughly convinced that you can get a room full of Nobel Prize winners on the issue of climate change. You can have the best empirical scientific evidence. This is not an academic issue. It is a political issue, because we have all the evidence that you have done and others. And it is not convincing the political leaders in Washington, D.C. Therefore, that's why the role that California plays, the outsized role as the fifth largest economy on planet Earth plays, looms huge to working with other subnational governments. So state by state by state, we will crowd the United States of Washington, D.C., because right now, with regards to decarbonizing the grid, for example, 33 million Americans now are covered under that law, because other states have followed the state of California. So that's why political leadership, along with the scientific, the community, academic community, and the community organizing community, the sharp tip of the spear, like Dan Jacobson here at Environment California, coming all together, that's how we create these policies.
There we go. I think we do have time for a few questions. If we do have, if anyone wants to address the titans of California climate.
You all talked about the importance of communication and how that's led to some of the most important things, whether it was the Million Solar Roofs initiative, SB 100, and getting to 100%. That's what we've done on the electricity side. What kind of programs and kind of public image programs do we need, PR programs do we need on the transportation side that get us not only to 1 million charging stations? You've done it with the, the big ad that we just saw. That's been incredible. How do we get people onto the bus so that they take the bus and go? How do we get them to do an electric bike, first mile, last mile? We not only need the policies, but I think we need the PR pieces in there as well, so that when we make those changes up in Sacramento, or we try to make them, the public is right there with the people doing it. And how do we make it so Republicans and Democrats can see that as a public health issue?
For me, at least, and I think Arnold talked about this a lot actually, is on the public transportation tailpipe piece and changing behaviors and moving either to EVs, moving them to public buses, moving them to walking, electric scooters, what have you, et cetera. To me, it's about smog. It's about smog. It's about smog. It's about pollution, dirty, toxic pollution that children breathe into their lungs. It's about asthma and public health, what Mary just mentioned. To me, it's about that. And the last thing I would say is Arnold is brilliant in the thinking about reframing. I think, biasly, that Republicans do a much better job when it comes to reframing. No new taxes. That's 3 words. Simple, straightforward. No new taxes. Something that's abhorrent to all of us in this room. Build that wall. That's 3 words. Build that wall. You know what it means, whether you agree with it or not. It has a very visceral reaction to folks, and it has an impact on folks emotionally. With our empirical evidence that we've done 100% clean energy, 100% clean energy is off the tops of the roof. Even with Republicans, it's 50+1 with Republicans. So how we message, and this thing, tailpipe you're referring to right now, is about smog. Smog, smog, smog.
Mary?
Well, yeah, thanks. I just want to say that I think the question you're raising is exactly the right question. Some of us in Sacramento are getting together now and working to try to put a package together that would do, I think, what you're asking for. I'm not sure that we've got the message correct or the naming correct, but I think what we have is the technical pieces of what it would take. And so it's very expensive because this is not just about passenger cars. It has to include freight. It's got to include the trucks and the buses and ultimately the planes and the locomotives and the ships too, as all part of the same picture. But I think that if we can lay out, I'd like to see it be a 10-year package that the legislature would endorse with a very substantial amount of money, like all the money that's in the greenhouse gas fund, GGRF, and probably it would take more. It would probably take some congestion fees, things like that. But yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to kind of line out and hope that we can put something together that the governor and the legislature would embrace.
I totally agree with both of them. And I just want to add that it's questionable. First of all, I think it's great to have a 10-year plan because politicians always just think just for things like how long am I in office? Does that have an effect while I'm in office? Well, you know, when we did our infrastructure package, it was very clear that I and many up there in Sacramento would not be in office because it was a 10-year package. It was a 10-year deal. And I tell you that 10 years is still too short. I think anytime you want to do something really big, like what we are talking about here, where you redo the transportation system in California, or if it is, getting off fossil fuels over a period of time and lowering greenhouse gases, all this stuff, it is like 20, 30 years. Like, for instance, when you talk about the challenge, how do you bury the electric lines in California rather than having them like a third world country above the ground? And then every time there's a little kind of a wind, they fall down and they create fire and they kill people. Well, how long does it take for those guys to figure out they should bury it like in Europe? Copy Europe. That's what they do, right? And so this way we don't kill people. But it is I guarantee you, that is a 30-year plan. Because you cannot find the money to do this from one year to the next, nor will you have the time to do it from one year to the next. So it takes time to do that, but people don't have that vision. So that's what it takes. I think that Mary's right. It is a long-term plan that you have to have. You have to have the courage. Yes, it costs a lot of money. Nothing is cheap. But I think that if you communicate it the right way, I think that people will go for it. If you lay it out the right way and says, this is what this state will look like in 30 years from now, not in 10 years, because you saw with the high-speed rail, right? They're still trying to pound in one of the rails and trying to figure out how to get it straight. And there's no light, there's no high-speed rail yet, right? So it's like, and this is going on now for 30 years, right? So think about that. So, but I think infrastructure should not be forgotten here. Infrastructure is very, very important. Tunnels, for instance, in Los Angeles or anywhere else, to build tunnels from the valley to the Malibu, from Malibu to downtown Los Angeles. When you go to Europe, you will see that tunnels are very casually being built. It's no big deal to build a tunnel. You have the technology now to just go through it. You know exactly where you go in, where you come out, and you can really forget about all this driving back and forth. Like all the big mountains in Austria now are cut through. You come out on the other side. You can go to Italy now in just 2-3 hours, which usually took you 6 hours. And you don't have to go to the Serpentine, going up the mountain, the Großglockner, and then down the other side, and all this, which creates a lot of extra smog. And so the bumper-to-bumper traffic that we have in California or in a lot of cities, especially in Los Angeles, have you seen the smog lately? I mean, it's increasing again. So we're not solving the problem when it comes to transportation. Just as Mary said and Kevin said, the transportation is a real danger. that we're doing so well with everything else. So, but part of that package, infrastructure. We got to build tunnels, we got to build more freeways, and we got to build the rails, the light rails, in a very quick way, as quickly as possible, because let's not forget that the tire companies, the oil companies, and the car companies got together all over the United States and bought up from major cities the light rail, ripped them out, and burned the cars. So they never can come back. We had the most sophisticated light rail system in Los Angeles, going to Malibu, to Long Beach, to Pasadena, all over the place, to the valley, everywhere. They bought it up and they destroyed it because they wanted to create a culture that my car, I'm in control. You know, and then the car has to be molded to your personality, you know, and all of this kind of stuff. It was kind of like a personal thing. So now, what you're saying is, let's get off that has been created for 30 years. So people are addicted. You get them addicted to having their own car, and now we have to slowly get them off. It's not from one year to the next. I think it would take decades to do that, but it can be done. With a clear vision as we have, and as the leaders have in this state, it can be done. No two ways about it.
I agree. I think we have time for one last question.
Great panel, great video. 2 questions. One, I keep reading about some of the testing that's going on with the electric drones for transportation of people in other countries. So I was curious how you guys feel we're doing with keeping up with that and developing that here, and then maybe also just thoughts on the attempt to close Santa Monica Airport, which is part of federal airspace, and then how that might impact future air technology.
Anyone want to take on drones or?
Well, we had an interesting meeting about a year ago with some of the largest transportation providers, including Amazon and others, and the topic of drones was big on the agenda. There's a lot of work being done, but it's pretty much all being done in the private sector, as far as I can tell. But it's certainly something we're following. There's been initial reaction to the idea of much increased drones was a very negative one. People started immediately worrying about interference with existing aviation, about privacy, other problems that could occur. So that was sort of like the reaction to the autonomous vehicles. It's like, let's worry about all the bad things that could happen first. And I think we've kind of gotten over some of that and are now starting to look in a more comprehensive way about what could be possible. So I think there's going to be some announcements in that area in the next year or two that will be helpful. But I want to just, if I may, add that it's always more fun and more interesting and uplifting to talk about the vision of the future. And we all want to be part of what the next wave is going to be like, what the new technology, the new vision. But at the same time, as we see it today, we're going to be stuck with the kinds of vehicles that we have today, burning fossil fuels for quite a long time to come. There's not enough places where you could turn them into sculptures or planters, even if we recycled them all. They're still going to be out there unless we can figure out some really fast way of getting everybody into all different kinds of models. So we have to focus on what the new cars are going to be like. We want to sell them. We want them to be great. But the reason why we're having this fight with the Trump administration is not about the electric cars, although that's underneath their opposition. It's about gasoline cars and how they're going to be as efficient as they can be while they're still out there. So I think that the point of several people have made is that we've got to get people out of those cars, driving less. It's not just about the exciting new cars.
We need the long-term vision and expedited action. I think that's a great capstone to this. I would like to thank the panelists. This was amazing, and yeah, a lot of progress, a lot more to do. So.